From the moment you could speak, they handed you a script. God is watching. God is judging. God knows everything you've ever done, even the things you never dared to say out loud. It didn't matter where you were, in a church, at home, alone, in your room, he was there, invisible, silent, waiting. So you behaved. You followed the rules, not because you understood them, but because you were afraid of what might happen if you didn't. Fear became morality, obedience became faith, and guilt became your shadow, one you were taught to carry like a badge of honor. But here's the problem. The God you feared was never real. He was a projection built by systems that needed control, not truth. You were taught that the universe has a mind like yours, that it thinks in terms of good and evil, reward and punishment, that somewhere, someone was keeping score. But nature doesn't keep score. The stars don't punish. The wind doesn't care if you prayed. The tree doesn't judge you for your thoughts. That voice in your head, it's not divine, it's inherited. And Baruch Spinoza saw it centuries ago. In a world drunk on theology, built on fear and hierarchy, he said the unspeakable: God is not a judge. He is the law itself, not a lawgiver, not an enforcer, but the underlying structure, the necessary logic behind everything that exists. He doesn't want anything from you. He doesn't care who you love. He doesn't burn people for their secrets. Because he is not outside creation, he is creation. You don't disappoint him because he doesn't have expectations. You don't anger him because he doesn't feel anger. You don't sin against him because you were made of him. And that single shift changes everything. But are you ready to live in a world where God doesn't punish, but also doesn't save? Because if he is the law, then you are not here to be judged. You're here to understand. If you wanted to control people, what would you do? You'd give them a story where they're watched, where their actions echo into eternity, where disobedience brings cosmic punishment and obedience brings divine reward. And you wouldn't need soldiers or chains. You'd only need fear, dressed as holiness. That's the genius behind the idea of a judging God. Not a creator, but a warden. Not a presence of wisdom, but a tool of power. Spinoza didn't just reject this God. He exposed the system that created him. He saw that for centuries, religion had turned God into a mirror of man's worst instincts. Jealousy, wrath, control, punishment. It was never about divine truth. It was about maintaining obedience to kings, to churches, to systems that needed your guilt to survive. So what happens when that fear dissolves? When you realize that thunder isn't anger, it's physics. That suffering isn't punishment, it's cause and effect. What happens when you're no longer terrified of being seen? Because you understand that everything already is. Spinoza didn't deny the divine. He saw it everywhere, but he refused to shrink it into a personality, especially one obsessed with human behavior. Instead, he saw God as substance, as the infinite reality in which all things exist and move, not a being watching from above, but the very fabric of being itself. He didn't want you to fear God. He wanted you to recognize that you could never be outside of God in the first place. And that truth doesn't make you small, it makes you free. Because if God is the law, the real natural law that governs stars and atoms and thought, then your goal isn't obedience. It's understanding, it's alignment, not out of fear, but out of clarity. So now the question changes. Not how do I avoid punishment, but how do I live in harmony with what already is? This is the collapse of moral theater, the end of performative guilt, and the beginning of something far more radical, a life lived without fear of divine wrath, because wrath was never divine to begin with. What happens when you no longer believe in a God who punishes, but you still feel punished? That's the silent war most people live in. They reject the angry deity. They stop going to church. They read philosophy. They say they're free. But the guilt doesn't go away, because it was never about religion. It was about conditioning. It's in the silence between your thoughts. It's in the hesitation before you speak your truth. It's in the way you apologize for your desires before you even act on them. This is the residue of judgment. It's the invisible stain left by centuries of fear passed down like scripture. And Spinoza saw it, not just in theology, but in the psyche. He knew that the real prison isn't in the world. It's in the mind that believes it's being watched. So he offered something rare, not a new religion, not a new set of commandments, but a different lens, one that doesn't ask, how do I please God, but what is real. And reality, to Spinoza, was divine, not because it was moral, but because it was necessary. Every event, every emotion, every thought, not random, not wicked, not holy, just, real, caused, connected, consequent. And in that view, guilt loses its throne, because guilt requires a moral breach. But in a system governed by law, not judgment, there are no breaches. There's only understanding or misunderstanding. So when you feel guilt, ask yourself, is this because I've harmed something real, or because I've defied a story someone needed me to believe? Because stories can be prisons, even sacred ones. And freedom doesn't begin with rebellion. It begins with clarity. Clarity about what is true, what is cause, what is consequence, and what is fiction. Spinoza's clarity was so dangerous, so radical, that they excommunicated him. Why? Because once you stop fearing divine punishment, you become impossible to control. You're not a threat because you're immoral. You're a threat because you're no longer obedient. And a free mind is the one thing no power can tolerate. When the fear of judgment dies, most people feel lost, because fear, for all its weight, gave them direction. Even if it was based on lies, it still told them who to be. So when the voice of wrath disappears, when the judge leaves the courtroom, you're left standing in silence, wondering, who am I now? This is the terrifying beauty of Spinoza's vision. He didn't replace one doctrine with another. He removed the scaffolding completely and pointed you toward the truth you were never taught to trust, the truth of your own experience. You were not being watched. You were being expressed by the same natural necessity that governs the stars, the tides, the growth of a tree. Not because you're special, not because you're chosen, but because you're here. And that is enough. But that freedom, the freedom of being part of the law rather than under it, comes with a cost. It demands responsibility without blame, action without fear, living without needing someone else to tell you what's right. Because when there is no divine judge, there is no one left to forgive you, only you and the consequences of your ignorance or your wisdom. This is not spiritual minimalism, it's spiritual maturity. No more prayers to be excused, no more rituals to cancel your shame, no more invisible parent to punish or reward, just the truth. And if you can bear it, if you can live in that unfiltered reality, where guilt is replaced with cause and obedience with awareness, then what you find isn't emptiness, it's alignment. The sense that your life, no matter how chaotic, is not accidental, that your pain was not divine vengeance, and your joy was not divine bribery. Everything from your worst failures to your most sacred moments was simply the law playing itself out through your existence. Not a script, not a test, not a punishment, just reality unfolding through you without shame, without approval. The only question left is, will you live in alignment with this law, or keep pretending you're being judged by something outside of it? They told you God was above you, that he looked down from the heavens, weighing your worth like gold on a scale, that he could be pleased or angered, that he could love you or turn his face away. But what if God has no face to turn? What if he is not above you, not beside you, not even separate from you, but the very ground you walk on, the breath you draw, the logic behind every movement of your mind? What if God doesn't forgive? Because he never condemned. What if he doesn't wait for your prayers? Because he's not listening, he's happening. This is Spinoza's heresy, and it is not comfortable. It won't flatter your ego. It won't soothe you with reward. It demands more clarity, more courage, more honesty. Because once you understand that God is not a judge but the law, there's no one left to blame, no one left to ask for permission, no one left to validate your life, only you and the structure of existence itself. And whether or not you choose to understand it, you're already obeying it. Even in your rebellion, even in your denial, you are not outside the law, you are made of it. So what will you do with that? Will you keep living as if someone is keeping score? Will you keep chasing forgiveness for being what you are? Will you keep bowing to shadows, hoping they'll save you? Or will you stop running, stop performing, stop apologizing for your humanity, and start living as part of the divine intelligence that was never judging you, only expressing itself through you? Because here's the truth, no one told you. You can't fall out of favor with the universe. You can only fall out of awareness. You were never on trial. You were never broken. You were never separate. You were just afraid. But now you know. So the final question is not about salvation. It's about recognition. Can you finally look in the mirror and stop begging to be seen? Can you finally stand still and stop waiting for permission to exist? Can you finally stop fearing God and start becoming what you already are?